Domo arigato, Deborah-san. 皆様、こんにちは。こんにちは。Congratulations! Now you've said the word hello in Japanese. Congratulations. So now you know at least 8 words in Japanese, in addition to hello, which you've just learned. Of course, you already know Fuji, Toyota, Datsun, and so congratulations. Did you notice how I was just counting? In the United States, so we count with 2 hands, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In Japan, China, Korea, everything is very, very tight. People are literally like this on the trains and subways. So space is at a premium, and so you count with like this. So just an indication of cultural issues. On the subject of pointing and hands, if you remember Tuesday's introduction, if you point with your finger, this can be very offensive in many cultures. So instead of doing this, it's safer, more neutral, to point with your full hand, your fingers together, palm up. So let's practice this. Everyone please point to the nearest bathroom. Okay, very good. So you got half of it right. Excellent. The pointing was correct. However, the nearest bathroom up there in the hotel in your rooms, because if you are abroad and you ask, you're in a store and shopping for shoes, clothes or something, and you ask for where's the bathroom, people wonder why you possibly want to take a bath among the shoes and the clothes, right? So that out there is the lavatory, the men's room, the restroom, in British English, the water closet, or the WC, or the loo, or sometimes called the toilet, very simply. Okay, so a bit of international knowledge to get started. As Deborah said, I have studied 8 languages. I've been to at least 55 countries, many of them multiple times. I've lived in 4 countries, and I have a master's degree in international marketing with a master's degree in international, it's like an international MBA with a focus on marketing. So on the subject of international business, does anyone have any idea the value of exports every month? Any idea? Any takers for 100 million?
5 trillion?
5 trillion? Not quite. Okay, so
3 trillion.
3 trillion every month, not every year. Yeah.
Monthly?
Okay. So the value of U.S. exports every month is at least $200 billion in goods and services. So how many of you would like to get a small piece of that action? Yes. So we will see what we can do to help you with that. So a bit about my personal background and how I got into this. My parents separated when I was 1.5 and divorced when I was 3. And back then, in the dark ages of the 1950s, this simply was not done. It was considered shameful, just basically unheard of. So I was the only divorced child I knew until I was 11, which was a very lonely existence. And there were, of course, no other kids to relate to about this and no other adults to talk to about this. So again, it was very lonely. But I felt as if I was living in 2 countries, even though they were 10 minutes apart from each other. I was born in Philadelphia, and my parents raised me in the suburbs. My mother remarried when I was 6, and she and my stepfather and my half-brother and my father lived separately. So my mother was kind and gracious and warm and loving and caring and generous and very unconditional. My father, on the other hand, after the divorce, moved in with his sister, her husband, my uncle, and my 3 cousins, their sons, my 3 cousins. And they and my extended paternal family were very much the opposite. They were strict and rigid and cold and controlling and very conditional. And in addition, my father belittled me, not my father, not just my father, all of them, belittled me, put me down, criticized, so my opinions were often invalidated. So it was a very difficult existence, learning how to navigate between two very different cultures 10 minutes apart from each other. On the other hand, my father was one of the pioneers of the computer industry back when it was being born, and he traveled a lot to Europe. So he would send from these places I had never heard of, he would send me postcards from cities and countries he visited and bring me back coins from these countries. And so from a very early age, from like 4 or 5, I became aware that there was a world out there. And I knew the world spoke other languages. And so I always had the feeling that this craziness, which no one could explain to me, and I was too young to ask the proper questions to have it explained, that this didn't make sense. The grass had to be greener out there somewhere. And so I had the as I was growing up, when I was around 11 or so, we had to take a language in junior high school. And so I started to learn languages both in school and then out of school, because I had this crazy notion that my father couldn't understand me at all in English. Maybe if I try another language, that might work. Well, that didn't make sense intellectually because he didn't speak another language. Oh, on the subject of language, separate issue. In English, what's the adjective? How do we describe a person who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. How do you call a person who speaks 2 languages? And 1 language? Okay, monolingual or American. So my father in that way was a typical American. And again, I had to learn how to navigate between these cultures, and this became my first real intercultural experience. And even though my father and I never really reconciled, and I could never communicate with him ultimately, but I turned lemons into lemonade by establishing a global marketing company to help bridge the gaps from, say, Americans going abroad, foreigners coming here, and the translations business, which helps people communicate in other languages, which of course my father didn't speak, but that was pretty fine. So, this is the class Fundamentals of International Business and Cross-Cultural Communication. In case any of you were wondering, that is called the Burj Khalifa. At the moment, that's the tallest building in the world. It's in Dubai. It's 148 stories, and around there is the observation deck at both floors 125 and 126. So it's a pretty magnificent building, and of course, when you look down below, these skyscrapers, which are 80 stories, look like miniature Legos or something. So, what we're not going to do here is to discuss your individual products and services and how to get them into specific countries. If you'd like to discuss that, we can make an appointment and discuss that. What we are going to do is to present different ways of thinking so that you can understand how other peoples behave and operate. And if you understand these fundamentals, I'm calling them frameworks or guidelines, if you can understand the frameworks or guidelines from which other peoples think, behave, and operate, then you will understand the fundamentals of how to do international business. So everything I'm going to talk about has exceptions, and I'm very aware of that. So some of the exceptions, of course, are Americans who have lived abroad, foreigners who have lived here and returned home, both of whom, of course, automatically have an international experience. Foreigners, this is wonderful, foreigners who think they know the US because they watch US, and then they come here and surprise, surprise, it's not quite as clear as they think. Yes, exactly. And some overseas entrepreneurs are also exceptions. So all of these kinds of people will act differently than natives abroad whom you may encounter, who will have limited exposure to what I'm going to present to you. And of course, some trends may also not apply to specific countries. So, where do we start? It's always good to start at the beginning, and to understand other peoples, it's always good to understand ourselves first. And most people in general are not introspective. We don't understand ourselves first. So that will be a point of comparison to understand everybody else. So, the first framework I'd like to present to you is informality versus formality. So I'd like you to imagine a continuum, and informality is on this side, and there's a line, and formality is on this side. Where do you think the US falls along this continuum?
Informality.
Informality, how close to the end of informality? To the extreme? Very good. So yes, the US is very much an informal culture, and we are pretty extreme, but from my observation analyses and other experts in this field, there are 3 countries that are more informal than we are, and that is Israel, Australia, and New Zealand. Okay? But the point of all of this is not necessarily exactly where countries fall, because if you speak to cultural anthropologists and sociologists, they will disagree, and that doesn't matter. So the specific position doesn't matter. What does matter is on what side of the continuum countries fall. Okay? So if we're very informal, which countries are most formal? Any ideas?
Japan, China, and Korea.
Okay, one of them is right, which is Japan and, sorry? No, not quite. Okay, so Japan and Korea are the most formal. That's the South Korean flag, by the way. And in the middle are the Europeans in general. And of the Europeans, the British are toward the more informal side, and the German speakers, the Germans, Austrians, and Swiss Germans, are on the more formal side. This used to not be the way it is. The British have become a lot more informal over the past 40 years or so, and the entire world is becoming more informal, a lot because of American influence. But in general, this is a good way to remember it. And, excuse me. Why is this not moving? So I've abbreviated it here, so as we go on, you can refer to that to remember certain things. So I'd like to give you an example of how this works. May I have 3 volunteers who have name tags showing, please? Please? Yeah. Okay. And line up just here, not, I guess a little more toward this side. Okay. Very good. Okay, so I'd like you each to introduce yourselves to me as if we're out in the hall at CEO Space. We're meeting for the first time at CEO Space. Okay, and please say your name and my name. So for example, hi, my name is, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Hello, Philip. My name is Linda.
Hi, good to meet you, Linda.
Hi, Philip. My name is Spencer.
Hi, good to meet you, Spencer.
Hello, Philip. I'm Walter Vore.
Hi, good to meet you, Ms. Okay, so that's one way to do it. I'm going to show you another way to do it. Hello, Mr. DeVore, pleasure to meet you. I'm Philip Auerbach. Hello, Mr. Gould, pleasure to meet you. I'm Philip Auerbach. Hello, Ms. Fostek, a pleasure to meet you. I'm Philip Auerbach. Good, thank you. Please sit down.
More formal.
Voice is going there.
So when they introduce themselves, they use their first names. When I introduce myself to them, I said Mr. or Ms. with their last name. Okay, so what did you notice about that? What's the difference of?
The formality.
Very good, the formality, yeah. So
There was still a handshake, there was still eye contact, but the words were more formal.
the words were more formal. So in essence, if you are in Europe, again, a more formal business culture, if you're here, in general, people will use their titles, like Mr. or Mrs., with the surname, with the last name. And that's just more common, and we of course use our first names. So what do you think would happen, or how do you think a person would feel if you introduce yourself to a European with your first name?
They would be uncomfortable that you're too familiar.
They would be uncomfortable, right? And
It could be disrespectful.
yes, disrespectful or offensive, yeah? So in general, if you're dealing with a more formal culture, it's safer to err on the side of formality Because if you're very formal, then you can always become informal. Someone can say, you know, please call me Heinz, please call me Inga, whatever. But if you start informally, you cannot easily become more formal. It's very uncomfortable. So, why do you think in the US we use first names? What purposes does it serve?
To become closer, informally, faster.
Okay, good. More relaxed, good. Any other ideas?
Last names can be difficult to pronounce.
That's also true. Okay, but
Possibly the mutual self-respect is a little lower.
What did she say? I didn't
she said last names can be hard to pronounce.
Oh, okay.
And I'm sorry, what did you say? Disrespect.
Yeah, you would be, we're more kind of disrespecting, so we're more informal.
Okay. I wouldn't necessarily say disrespecting, but that's good. Most Americans use first names, as you were saying, sort of to create informality immediately. Another reason sociologically is to establish friendships. People, you know, think, you know, let's just be friends right away. And a lovely company called Facebook has accelerated this. Everyone should suddenly be friends. And Americans forget that there's a wonderful world called a word called acquaintance, which is what most people are on Facebook. And friendship in most countries is reserved for people who are very close to you, to whom you can rely for, problems, emergencies, whatever. So Americans tried to break down barriers very quickly by using first names. Some examples of this. Cold calling. I can be in Seattle and call someone in Florida. I can be in Maine and call someone in San Diego. And in the United States, we can just pick up the phone and sell our products or services. Over the phone, of course, some people may want to negotiate about price or whatever, but in essence, a lot of business here can be done just on the phone, and our culture invented basically cold calling. In our language business, we do an equivalent of that, which is email blasts. And we send emails all over the country promoting our services, and people write back to us, yes, this is what I've got the manual, this is the language I want, how much is it? We can give a quote, we send it back by email, they approve it, it comes back, we start, and it happens, okay? So very, very quick. Now personally, I like to call clients to establish a relationship, a rapport, to explore what the bigger needs are, but after the first interaction, it does go by email. So there's just no personal contact in that way. No phone contact, no voice contact. Snaps. Wonderful, wonderful example of American business that Bernie has created. Here's the problem or solution or challenge. This is how my company solves it, and this is what I need. All in 15 to 30 seconds. So this is something that, again, just does not work in other cultures, as we will see soon. And meals. If I were to come to visit you in your offices and take you out to lunch, we're meeting for the first time, what do we do when we get to the restaurant? What do we do for the first 5 minutes or so? What's the conversation about?
The weather, the sports.
Yeah, the weather, the sports, how was your trip, and so forth. And then what do?
Order food.
We order food, we plunge into the meal, right? Okay, so this is a very American way of doing things. Of this is building trust and rapport. Now, yes, we do need to build trust and rapport, and we do build trust and rapport in our normal interactions. The difference is really the degree of trust and rapport that we would do, and how long it takes, and so forth. What do you notice about these American titles of people? There's one commonality among all of them.
Highfalutin.
How did they get these titles?
Authority.
Degrees.
Degrees. They earned these titles, right? This is very American, to earn titles. Compared to line A, what about these titles?
Inherited.
They're inherited, right? People are born into that. And line B, can you see it? Any relation there?
Bestowed.
Line B, they could be inherited or they could be by merit. So just to know that, again, different peoples obviously operate in different frameworks. Now, a lot of what I'm going to do today is to burst bubbles. And bursting bubbles means to burst to burst conceptions about what we think as Americans, and we assume that it applies to everyone else out there. And it doesn't. So some of these bubbles will be a bit uncomfortable, but I'm going to do them anyway because it's important to understand again that the way we do business here is not necessarily the way we do business there, and the assumptions of life that we have here are not necessarily what we have out there. So, for example, this wonderful line from the Declaration of Independence that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, and I have news for you, they are not created equal. So, I do not mean by that this, which is that yes, everyone deserves dignity and self-respect, and everyone has common, human feelings, and people want the same basic goals for their families. Okay, so that, I get it, that's fine. The really becomes in social class and hierarchy that not all people are equal. Now, because we're a first name society, we try to do everything informally and casually. One of the purposes of first naming is to try to make things equal between people, because we do not like, as Americans, we do not like distinctions of social class and hierarchy, and we had a revolution against this. But this very much is part of reality in a lot of the world. So, in the United States, how many of you, I know everyone's an entrepreneur, does anyone have a staff of people who work with you? You do, okay. Sharita, you do? Okay. And the rest of you, have you worked with other companies before you became entrepreneurs? Okay. So all of you remember what's something called a staff meeting? Okay. So in theory, in the United States, in staff meetings, the bosses will tell you, yes, we welcome your input, right? But they may not. Right? They say that, many times they say it and they don't really mean it. But enlightened bosses, enlightened companies in this country say that, yes, we want everyone's input, especially sales and marketing, because you guys are out there in the trenches, you know what people are thinking, right? Also in this country, it's quite common for the senior business owners to socialize with the whole staff, whether it's going out to lunch or sometimes a staff dinner, picnics, and sometimes to family events. Sometimes people would, you might invite your staff to your weddings or whatever the case may be. Now, in most other countries, that's not the way things are. Management is very much top-down. The owner, the managers make the decisions and tell the staff what to implement, and there's not a lot of solicitation from below. Again, there's some, it depends on the country, depends on the company, depends on the culture, but in general, things are very much top-down. In other countries, Italy, India, and Latin America, businesses are often owned by families going back generations, 2 or 3 generations. And first of all, how many of you have adult children? Just one? Okay. Is your son or daughter in your company?
Kind of. They collaborate within the company.
Okay, good. Anyone else? Do you expect your children to join your companies when they grow up? Yeah? Okay. So in the United States, we would like our kids to join our companies in many cases, especially if we like them and they like us. That's a big if. But we let our kids decide for themselves what they want to do, right? So we're very open to that. In other cultures, children are expected, they're groomed, and they're expected to enter the family business. So it's much more of, again, a hierarchy that the owners are at the top, everyone else is below. And in general, there's a sense that the trust is among the family unit. Now, you may not like or trust your own relatives, your extended family, but the sense abroad is that my family, my extended family are people I can trust and rely on, whereas outside managers who might be brought in or the staff may not be as trustworthy. Okay, so it's just a different sense of priorities and a different sense of expectations. How many of you know other languages? Okay, can the rest of you, do you remember your high school Spanish or whatever you might have studied? Okay, so I'd like you to remember one of the languages that you've learned, okay? And when I count to three... Sorry?
Does Pig Latin count?
Pig Latin can count, absolutely. And when I count to three, I'd like you to say all of the words for you in your languages, and the languages that you know, okay? Okay, 1, 2, 3.
That's funny.
I think you said, where's the restroom?
Más tequila, por favor.
Okay, very good. That's also extremely useful. Not you, but it's very useful.
Tango que irme, I knew that when I had to work in the Bronx.
Very good. So, most of you used more than one word for you, right? Because in other languages, for example, Hebrew, Arabic, and Farsi, which is Persian, there are 4 words for you: masculine, feminine, masculine singular, feminine singular, masculine plural, feminine plural. And in European languages, there is usually at least 2 and often 3 or 4 words for you: informal and formal. So informal is basically in your family, to your pets, to children, and to very close friends. And formal is everybody else. The person you meet on the bus, the person you meet on the street, your newspaper vendor, your neighbors very often, even though you've lived next to each other for 10 years, you'll still use formal you. And certainly within the companies, other managers, other people in the company. So again, this is a kind of a hierarchy that is much more psychological. It's not, it's not a rigid hierarchy, but it automatically sets up psychological barriers between us and them, us and everybody else. Now in Asian languages, there are words for you, but people tend not to use them because instead they use people's titles. For example, is division manager going to the staff meeting tomorrow? Or is vice president, has vice president finished the plan yet? Okay, so it used people's titles instead of the word for you because it's more respectful and it establishes the hierarchy. I'm lower, that person's higher, or just more respectful in general. And in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, there's a word for basically the way you would greet anyone like Mr. or Mrs., but there's also a word, we would call it professor in English, but it's not professor, it's basically is someone who's older and wiser. It's not like a college professor, it can be, but it's
Like the honorable.
the honorable, someone who's more honorable than the average person in the company, or the average person that you'll meet. Okay, so again, all of this sets up a hierarchy. Individualism. What do we think of the US in individualism, about individualism? What?
We're about that, but we also are about conformity at the same time.
Yes, okay, but give me some adjectives. How do we consider individuals in this country?
Individualism is prized.
Prized, okay. Any other ideas?
That's what we all want to be seen as.
Okay, we aspire to be individuals. Okay.
Becoming your unique self.
Unique, prized, aspire to. Okay, so it's your right. That's very interesting. Yes. Okay. So all very positive images. Yes. Good. So that's how we view it here, but how we view it there is quite different. So in Japan, in Korea, in China, you can sort of imagine that it's the bit opposite. So individualism in East Asia, at least, is considered very negative. And there's an expression, well, and you said conformity, I think, Linda? So conformity is a much prized value in other countries. And there's an expression in Japanese, which is the equivalent in Chinese and Korean, that the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. Okay? Now, that's not what we would say in the United States, right? Because we value individuals. We want people to be free and independent and, unique and so forth. But individualism in other countries, again, it has an opposite image. And one of the issues we confront in the translations business is if we're translating a concept and we interpret it one way and the target culture interprets it another way, we have to do a footnote or something to explain. So, for example, explaining the legal system. People don't have our US legal system. The idea of trial by jury, that's a very Anglo-Saxon concept, which other people don't have. So same thing with individualism, it's not something that other people prize. So, the other framework I'd like to present to you first was informality versus formality, and the next one is shame versus guilt. What do you think we are as the United States? Guilt? Any other ideas?
Are we talking specifically America?
Yes, in the US, yeah.
I'd say guilt.
Okay, guilt.
Because Americans got no shame.
Americans what?
Americans have no shame.
Shame doesn't really play as big a role here as it does. They shame you in other cultures.
Yes, this is true.
Ostracized from the family, from the business, and from everything. They shame you.
Yes, exactly true. So guilt cultures are United States, Canada, the Caribbean, Australia, New Zealand, all of Europe basically, and one country in the Middle East in particular, and that's the Israelis, because 3,000 years ago their Jewish ancestors invented guilt, right? And then the Italians, the Catholics, perfected it, and the Protestants spread it around the world. So primarily guilt is a Western European value system.
Yeah, it's a
Judeo-Christian, and it can be Muslim as well, because Islam comes from the same Abrahamic root. But Islam is a special case, which I will get to in a moment. So, guilt cultures, and this is very, pretty much the way guilt cultures behave and operate that we don't necessarily think about. The guilt culture rules come from God, from 10 Commandments, from on high, however you define on high. Now, one of the primary issues here is that you do not have to be religious. You can be atheist or agnostic and very much be part of a guilt culture, because it's not, it does come from religion, but it's not about religion. So if you live in a Western society, you automatically adopt these values, these guilt values, even, again, if you're atheist or agnostic. So these are considered eternal rules that apply through the centuries. You should not steal, you should not murder, you should not commit adultery, you should not, you should not lie, you should be not want what is not yours, you should not want someone else's property, and so forth. So these again are sort of eternal Western values that have been pretty much the same throughout 300 years or so. Or in this case 2,000 years basically, they can always be adopted. They can always be adapted or changed according to the era, but the rules basically are the same and understood. People in guilt cultures regulate themselves. So, for example, are any of you in an industry that requires renewals, business licensing exams? Anyone? Okay. What industry? You're in real estate, in construction. I'm sorry?
Yeah, like,
In Spanish?
No. Are you in a business that requires licensing?
Yes.
Okay, what business is that?
Real estate.
Real estate, good. So if you were to take your licensing exam, and if you would cheat and get caught, you would feel guilty, right? And this is from your consciences. This is from Western people's consciences that this arises. And the primary value of cultures are back to the individual fulfillment, that we're unique, we want to be on our own, independent, and we take personal responsibility for our decisions. Okay, so this is basically who we are. Now the opposite of...
Our legal system either pronounces you guilty or innocent. So that whole guilt thing is
it's very much part of who we are.
Yes.
Yeah. And sometimes a hung jury if you can't figure it out. But yeah, very much so. You're innocent or you're guilty, and that's the way it is. And in other countries, you're guilty until you're proven innocent, but it's still the same basic model. So the opposite of guilt cultures are shame cultures. And shame cultures are primarily Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, Vietnam to some extent, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Myanmar or Burma, and Sri Lanka. And all of these are primarily Buddhist countries, which is where the shame construct comes from. And if you look on the sheet that you've got there about the number of languages and so forth, you will see that there are a whole lot of Chinese speakers, at least 1 billion Chinese speakers. So even though the number of countries is relatively small, these are a whole lot of people, about at least a third of the world, if not more. Okay, so shame cultures are quite different. Their value systems are very different. So an individual, while we would value an individual here, an individual in shame culture is part of a group. That's what's most important. And a person's identity is part of a group. And the groups can be defined in many ways. It could be, the immediate group, of course, is your family, right? And after that, it could, there are many ways to do it. It could be your company, it could be like a clan or a tribe that you're in, which is very common. It could be like a team or a club that you join, but people in other cultures don't change as much as we do. If they join something like a karate team or whatever, they stick to it for many years. They don't change clubs the way we change our clothes. So they form this group identity in a much stronger way. And people's behavior, good, bad, or indifferent, reflects on individuals' behavior reflects on the group. So if your brother or sister does something bad, that reflects immediately on the family. And depending on what the group is, that can reflect on other larger groups that person may be part of, like a club or a clan. In China, for example, there are a lot more Chinese tourists coming to the West doing tourism now than ever before. And the Chinese government, a lot of them go on group tours. So there are some who travel individually, but most of them go on group tours. And the Chinese government will tell them before they leave China, or maybe, I'm not sure where it is on the airplane or whatever, but they will tell the Chinese tourists, behave properly, your behavior reflects on China. Now, no American government would tell that to us. But again, China is considered a group, and shaming the group is shaming China. The primary values in shame cultures are relationships and trust and conformity. Conformity, very, very much so. Again, because individuals are not as highly valued. And relationships and trust are extremely important. And if you don't build relationships and trust, you need to build relationships and trust in order to do business, in order to do any kind of real transactions. Okay, it's different than here. So yes, we have relationships and trust here, and we have people like the Reckless who will vet companies, but there it's much more of a personal feeling. They don't necessarily need a vetting company. They can rely on the brand name. Oh, you're from Toyota, you're from Weibo or something in China. Your brand is very trustworthy, therefore I trust you automatically. So it's partially that, but it's also just building relationships, as we will get to soon. Now the top one, does anyone by chance have an Asian employee? Especially first generation. You have Asian employees, yes? Who? Oh, from Korea, that's right. Okay. So, if you ever get Asian employees, and especially first generation Asian employees, first generation means, first generation in this country, and sometimes they could still be here for 20 years and they still feel this way, and sometimes their children still feel shame. Be very careful, especially in staff meetings. So when you are all previously employed and in staff meetings, I presume that your boss sometimes gave public praise, right? Gee, Mary, you did a really great job, and gee, John, the sales figures for this month were really good. Does that sound familiar? Okay. Now some lessons bosses, I have had them, will also criticize people in staff meetings. You know, you really screwed up, we lost that account, and you know, because of that, you know, we're now set back by 2 quarters or something. Okay, so praise and criticism are much more common in guilt cultures. Public praise and criticism are much more common in guilt cultures. If ever you have shame culture employees or interns or others who are working with you, please do not praise or shame them praise or criticize them in a staff meeting, in a public setting. Public can be just a small group, because especially if you criticize them, they will find a way to sabotage you or sabotage your company. Very subtly, though you'll never know it, but this is partially what you do, because it's extremely embarrassing to them. So it's embarrassing for us in a guilt culture when we get criticized, but it's even doubly embarrassing for them because they come from a shame culture. So if you do need to do it, either praise or criticism, it's best to do it in a private office. Yes?
So is that something conscious or subconscious that they
What are you asking?
That when they
undermining
sabotage.
your company? Would they do it consciously, or is it a subconscious because it's part of the culture that
I don't know. It could be both. Depends on the individual.
combination?
Yeah, it really depends on the individual. Some people are aware of what they're doing, and other people are clueless, just like here.
It's just
So,
behavior that is ingrained.
yeah, it's part of the behavior that's ingrained. That's true. Again, they're not always going to sabotage, but it is more likely to happen than not. Yes.
Does the shame culture have very much less litigation?
In general, yes. Yes, litigation is a very American. It's not even a guilt culture. It's very American, and it's become European. It's become, you know, other people as well, because they've adopted our negative ways. But yes, litigation is much more in the U.S. than it is there, or in Western cultures than it is there, and we'll see that soon. So, again, in a shame culture, you try not to draw attention to yourself. Remember, the individual that sticks up gets knocked down. Now again, the exception to this may be entrepreneurs. There are a lot of entrepreneurs in shame cultures, actually more in China than elsewhere, but even they are acting within a large box of values such as, you know, the constricts of the Chinese Communist Party, which tells them what they can and cannot do. So they're not individuals the way we are individuals. We don't necessarily abide by the rules. We like to break the rules because we're rugged individuals, right? And we form our own rules. But they are much more constricted by the societal rules in which they operate. Okay. So, in addition to, and the importance of saving face, which I will get to very shortly. So, in addition to shame cultures and guilt cultures, I call, and sociologists call, hybrid cultures. And those primarily are in Latin America, from Mexico down to, you know, Paraguay, Uruguay, Africa, mostly in the Middle East, up to Kazakhstan, the Muslim world, and through India, and then Indonesia and Malaysia. Okay? And the reason they are hybrid, and this is a very interesting and tricky concept, they are Western guilt cultures that have been superimposed on the tribal or indigenous cultures. Okay. One of the things that we don't realize, let me just ask the question, how long has human history been around? Because we talk about prehistory, so therefore there has to be a history. So how long has history been around?
6,000 years.
6,000 years? Any other ideas? Okay, so most people would say 10,000 years, because what we call history started in what's now Iraq, which is there, Mesopotamia and Iraq, and people basically were nomads, and then they settled in agricultural settlements, and from that became villages and towns and farms and so forth. So generally when people refer to history, they're talking about from 10,000 years on. What they're forgetting is that there is what a wonderful author, has called the Great Forgetting. And the Great Forgetting is that Homo sapiens had been on this planet for at least 100,000 years. That's 100,000 years of history. So you mentioned 3,000, 10,000. This is a drop in the bucket compared to 100,000 years or more. And before we had settlements like towns or cities and farms and so forth, people were in villages, and very often now people are in villages. And all villages are shame culture values because they're small collectives. They have to depend on each other for survival, and again, you know, their values are all about sharing and looking out for each other and group orientation, and you know, what you do as part of the group reflects on the village. So villages have been around for a very long time. So what happened is when the Europeans colonized most of the world, North America, South America, and they colonized Africa, and they colonized part of Asia, they overlaid their Western guilt values on top of these indigenous cultures. And so what you have is what I call a hybrid culture. Now there's nothing necessarily to do about it, it's just there, but I wanted to make you aware of it, because very often if you meet someone and you think, well, he's from Mexico, therefore he's Catholic, therefore he's part of a guilt culture, or you meet someone and you assume, well, she's from Vietnam, therefore she's a shame culture. It may not compute, it may not work out that way, because people from hybrid cultures can share both value systems. And very often the shame culture values are close to the top, they're close to bubbling. So Vietnam, for example, was colonized by the French. There are a lot of Vietnamese Catholics, but ultimately it's a Buddhist culture, so it's this combination. And I did Argentina and Chile, I left those out because the indigenous peoples there, I don't even know who they were, but whoever they were, they've basically been wiped out. So all that's left are the white Europeans who colonized Argentina and Chile. So those are very much guilt cultures. But again, most of Africa, certainly India, Southeast Asia, these are all hybrid cultures. Okay? So, I'd like to give you an example of saving face and what that's all about. So, I was in the United Arab Emirates, which on the map is, where is it? I was here, yes, right there. It's this, next to the green spot, it's the little brown spot on the map. So, United Arab Emirates, this is a very wealthy, let me just finish about the hybrid culture. So Islam grew up 1,300 years ago. So Judaism is about 3,000 years old, Christianity is 2,000 years old, and Islam's 1,300 years old. Okay? And so Islam really started in Saudi Arabia and then spread to North Africa, and then up through to the Middle East, Turkey, up to Kazakhstan, and so forth, and then also into part of India, and then into Indonesia, Malaysia. So these are, again, these are hybrid cultures, but more overlaid with Islam than the colonial power as well. So they've got a sort of a double hybrid. So, in any case, I was in Dubai for a business conference in December 2017, and and the people knew that I had a language business doing translating and interpreting, and I was called over into a private meeting. A gentleman called me over and said, I'd like you to, someone wants to meet you. Okay, fine, someone wants to meet me. And he brought me into a private room, and in the private room, I was introduced to Sheikh Ali and the interpreter and the facilitator, whose name I don't remember. Now, the gentleman who brought me over is the facilitator. And in shame cultures, the facilitator is a very important figure, because remember, shame cultures are about relationships, right? And building trust and rapport. So to build relationships, you often need a matchmaker. You need someone to introduce you to, you're someone that I'd like you to meet. Now, we're doing the same thing here with See-Me cards, and you're getting See-Me cards, and you may email someone, or someone could email you, hi Sam, I'd like you to meet Linda, and here's your respective emails, please connect. That's not a relationship. You're facilitating, but in a very, very minor way. So a facilitator is someone who really does bridge the cultures and bridge the businesses and does the introductions, and usually the facilitator would get a commission or some kind of fee for bringing the parties together. So the facilitator was in the room, and he introduced me to Sheikh Ali. Now, if you remember back to the very beginning, I showed you the slide of titles with an A line and a B line, and a sheikh was a hereditary title. Okay? So automatically people with hereditary titles, especially in the Middle East, especially in Islamic culture, do not start at the mailroom and work their way up. They do not start as middle managers and work their way up. They are at the top, and that's where they stay. Okay? So this is just something to understand. And very often people from Africa and Latin America whom you may meet here in this country who are students, for example, they're usually the elite of their countries. Their parents are either very wealthy or they're an elite in some way. And because, not always of course, but very often this is the case. The same thing with other countries in Asia. So the people that you meet here, again, may be the elite, and they can become facilitators with international business. So again, I was introduced to Sheikh Ali, and Sheikh Ali was the head of the Chamber of Commerce of Abu Dhabi. So the business capital is Dubai. It's sort of like New York with incredible, gorgeous skyscrapers. But Abu Dhabi is the capital city of the country, and it's like Washington, but not really, because it's got a lot of business there as well. And the two cities are about an hour and 15 minutes from each other. So Sheikh Ali was the head of the Abu Dhabi Chamber of Commerce. And he told me, so through the interpreter, he told me, he said he has the contract for, and I don't know what this meant exactly, and how does he have the contract, but maybe he has a venture on the side, I don't know, I didn't ask, it doesn't matter. He has the contract to set up a conference in Sudan in February to bring in FDI, foreign direct investment, to attract foreign investors to rebuild the economy of Sudan, as I was told. And would I like to have, since I run a language agency, would I like to have the subcontract to provide all the interpreters for all the international business people coming to this conference? So, dollar signs start appearing in my head. And those of you who will experience Jerry Foster tomorrow, our branding expert, he's got a wonderful expression called ka-ching, ka-ching. You know, your cash registers are ringing by doing something. And where in the United States can you get a no-bid contract? Very tough to do. You can if it's a very low amount, like under $5,000 from some government agencies, but not something like this. So he said, you know, of course the price has to be right, and I understood, yes, of course the price has to be right, but you know, give us your reasonable price, and then basically I can have the contract for this. So great, this is going to make my quarter, make my half year. This is fantastic, and then I busted my own bubbles. Because I realized that this was not such a good deal after all. So the leader of Sudan is a guy named Omar al-Bashir, and he is wanted by the International Criminal Court, which is based in the Netherlands, for being a war criminal, because it was he who instigated, implemented, and perpetuated the massacres of Darfur, which is in Western Sudan, and killed millions of people. So do I really want a contract to help the Sudanese government rebuild its economy? The answer is no, but for another reason too, because one of my considerations was, is this really going to trickle down to the people? Are the people going to benefit by creating jobs for the Sudanese, because there's massive unemployment there? And I quickly concluded that may happen, but it's less likely, because Omar al-Bashir and all of his cronies, all of his cliques in the government, are basically the same kind of war criminals. They're all complicit. And besides that, these are the kind of people who take bribes and take a piece of the action, and more money goes into their pockets than trickles down to the people. So I decided, no, I don't really want this. So I could have told Sheikh Ali very, not politely, but if I were a New Yorker and from Brooklyn or Queens, I would have said, yo, Sheikh Ali, drop dead. I ain't gonna deal with no war criminal.
Good Brooklynese.
Good Brooklynese. But I am a more refined Philadelphian, so I don't quite talk like that. And so I said it in a very, very different way. I said, Sheikh Ali, thank you very, very much. This is a tremendous, great honor that you've given me, a tremendous vote of confidence, and I truly appreciate what you're offering me, and I think it would be fabulous, and I would love to do this with you, love to do this venture with you. It's, again, a tremendous honor to accept this. Unfortunately, however, I regret that I cannot do it, and please understand, I do not at all mean to offend you. I simply cannot do this venture because, as you may know, the United States has sanctions against Sudan. To which he responded, oh, there are no more sanctions, the sanctions have been lifted. To which I responded, oh, is that so, really? I wasn't aware of that, but even if they've been lifted, I don't think all of them have been lifted. And as you may know, we do, well, you probably don't know, but we do a lot of business with the US government. We've got contracts from the Justice Department, our Defense Department, our Department of Homeland Security, and since I have contracts with the US government, I cannot risk jeopardizing my US contacts in case they're in Sudan. When I go back in a few days, I will check, but perhaps there's another country that we could work with instead. So, what did you observe about that interaction? Okay, what else?
I mean, if you don't shame him, I'm not going to do business with you and everything, but you go back to him down.
Okay, yes, I wasn't shaming him. Right. Okay.
You honored him first.
And I honored him partially because of his position in the hierarchy. And by the way, this massacre of the Darfuris, this is a political issue that's spread into business, because of this request. So this is an example of the Sudanese who thought themselves superior in their culture, and the Darfuris were very inferior in their culture. And this kind of tribalism, this kind of rivalry between ethnic groups is very, very common. A lot of the problems in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria are not political, they are ethnic, between the rivalry of the different groups. And how do you form democracy when one group really hates the other group or doesn't feel they can get along? And as a quick aside, the entire map of Africa, with two exceptions, one is Eritrea, is here, the purple, and one is South Sudan, which is there. The entire map of Africa was drawn up in a palace in Berlin in 1861 by the European colonial powers. They're the ones who drew the lines that we see now. And they drew the lines totally regardless of which peoples they were dividing. So, for example, there are Fulanis in Nigeria and Fulanis in Cameroon, there are Tswanas in Botswana, Tswanas in South Africa. They didn't give a damn. They did it totally based on colonial conquest, and some of the problems in Africa are based on tribalism, where people again have loyalty to their ethnic group much more than they have loyalty to the country. The country is an artificial construct. And obviously when they go abroad, then they need passports, but in many cases it's...
So that whole thing falls apart with Yugoslavia.
Exactly. Yugoslavia had the same kind of white tribalism. Exactly, yeah, that was an artificial country put together at the end of World War I, and that broke apart after the fall of the Soviet Union. So, so back to Sheikh Ali. So, saving face is not about you. Saving face is about the other person that you're dealing with. And you want to preserve that person's dignity and self-respect and public image, because if you embarrass him or her, then it doesn't go very well. And that can doom your deal before the deal has started. So you have to be very careful. And again, because he was a sheikh, I used honorary language and treated him very respectfully, because again, this is deference to people in the people who are born nobility or born in hierarchy, especially in the Muslim world. This is okay? Yes.
Is that shame fairly consistent from person to person, or can it be kind of phony and sincere?
Is what phony or what sincere?
That shame aspect, putting on that facade of allowing the other person to save face, or is there a real genuine feeling? Or?
There should be. Yeah, I mean, people can fake it, but I was trying to be very genuine when I spoke to him.
Sure.
Yeah. Sharita?
I was wondering, with the respect that you're speaking of now, I'd imagine that's applicable also between men and women talking to each other?
What do you mean in terms of shaming?
Like I've done some projects in Cambodia, I've done projects in Pakistan.
Yeah.
And when I'm speaking to the clients, one may be here in the States, but the other is there in that country or whatever. And I'm just wondering, should I have been talking differently to my client? I'm talking to them the same way I'm talking to you.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, did I disrespect them in a lot of ways?
By doing what, or by saying what?
Like, I was calling them by their first name and they're calling me by my first name. Are they speaking to me the way they believe that we do in our culture?
Probably.
Does that make it okay, or was I disrespecting them?
Yeah, it would have been better to use Mr. or Ms. So-and-so to start. And when these people give you the permission to call you by your first name, then you do it.
They didn't ask me for permission to call me Sharita.
They just started automatically?
Yes.
Okay, so they're doing it because they know that this is what Americans expect.
Okay, so then when they're doing business with us, they're probably operating the way we do in our culture.
Yes.
I didn't even think about it until listening to you now.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, I hope I just wasn't disrespectful.
Well, if you were and you still did your deal, then it didn't matter. Because they understand, they've seen enough about the United States to understand how we barbarians operate. So they can be very forgiving, but again, if you're aware of the issues, then it's better to do it that way.
I'll do it differently.
Okay. Yeah. Now, part of the issue also is that it's hard to know people's last names. In Indonesia, for example, people only have one name. There's no first name. There's basically just one name. So in Cambodia, I don't know, do you know how Cambodia works in terms of names, people's names?
Well, typically, if somebody's older than you, like visibly older than you, there's a specific term you use. If somebody's younger than you use that term. Or if they...
But in terms of Mr. or Mrs., do you know?
They don't really have Mr.
They don't have that. Yeah, I didn't think so.
This is just like, like the one in Cambodia, unless I was saying his name wrong, I was calling him Jacob. Now, I don't know if he named himself that, but that's just the name that I had. And
right. Okay, so what Jacob did, is what a lot of Chinese do, especially. When they're learning English, they're given, the teachers pick American names out of a hat, basically, out of a book. And they say, your name is Jacob, and your name is Sam, and your name is Samantha. And just partially because, like, if the Chinese name is Sue, then, you're Sue, or you're Susan. That's one way to do it. And the other way is just literally randomly picking a name. Your name is Sally. And, that's the person's name and when the person speaks English. So the same thing in...
That my Korean nail salon, they all have American names.
They all have American names.
I often ask my I ask them what their Korean name is.
Right, good.
Because I would like to know who they
Yes.
are.
Right, exactly. And they probably think, well, you Americans can't pronounce it, so I'm not going to bother with it. Yes.
No, I was going to say, Michelle, that, like, let me say, like, in a church setting where there are preachers and everything, I've noticed, like, I come from here and I go there so I experience both cultures. I would not call a preacher by their name. Hey, Robert, hey, this and this. You go by pastors. They find a lot of, if you don't recognize that part of them, they find disrespect. And if you go to an office and you just, oh, hi Phil, hi Robert,
Yeah.
no, I am Mr. So-and-so. Some of them can correct you.
Yes.
So I've taken volunteers, of course, from here to there, and you see them, I actually sometimes hold myself back because they come and they're like on this first name basis and they're, I cannot come and just touch your shoulder just anyhow. I have to give you space and respect you with my hands. So, but when they come around, they've never met them for the first time, they're meeting that person, but they're like, hey, what's that? Hi. So I shrivel back because I'm like, oh, you know that's not okay. But then I train them afterwards. And sometimes even before.
But you could train them before.
No, we train before, but when some of them miss it because it's not something common. So when they miss it, then I go backwards and then say, okay, so
Yeah.
this is
But there's also some cultures where women are considered a different
Right.
level than the men, and the women in business are not treated the same way as men in business would be.
This is true.
And, and,
Yeah.
and that's totally cultural.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And what Precious was saying is very true. I haven't seen any Texans do it yet, but the longer I'm here, I am sure they will come up and say, "Hi, man, how you doing?" And because speak. You do not touch people in other countries. You can kiss, bow, or shake hands, but you do not touch people, especially children. Don't touch people on the head. Don't touch children unless you're given permission, especially in East Asia. You just don't do it. It's very disrespectful. And in India, you don't do it. And in many cultures, men absolutely do not touch women, as in Muslim cultures. Now, some women are. If you see a woman wearing the hijab, the full dress, absolutely do not try to shake hands. Men do not try to shake hands with her. Women can, but you can talk to her, but you don't shake hands. You don't touch. More, I don't want to use the word modern. That's pejorative, but more. They would use the word uncovered. Uncovered women, who just not wearing the headdress and not wearing the robes. They may be more open to it. So let them in a way take the lead. In a lot of these cultural issues, it's best to let the host take the lead if you're uncertain of what to do. But again, when you're meeting someone for the first time, as in Europe, with the equivalent of Mr. or Mrs. in all languages. So those of you who know the other languages, Monsieur, Madame, Senor, Senora, Herr und Frau. It's best to use the title like that. And by the way, in European languages, there is no word for Ms. Very interesting. Ms. It's a new English word that's in about 20 years or so. Because, and again, this is like the American first naming issue to make us all friendly and equal. But the other cultures just don't have it. That term does not exist. And so it depends again on the language of the culture, but after a young woman stops becoming a young woman, let's say, 16, 18, she automatically becomes a Mrs., even if she's not married. Sometimes it's older, 22, 24. So, someone who was a mademoiselle suddenly becomes madame. And that's just, again, because of the titles and the way it is and just respect in that society. Yes.
Is there a special protocol for one's left hand?
Not in Europe, but in Asia, yes.
Middle East.
And in the Middle East, not using one's left hand. If you're left-handed and you shake with the left hand, that's different. But I think that's different. Is that different in Thailand?
Well, for the Middle East, I know the left hand is used for personal business.
Right.
And then,
Right.
so you only shake with the right hand.
Even if you're your left hand use, okay, that makes sense. So yeah, I'll repeat it. So in the Middle East and in India, And in other, I'm not sure, in Africa, you don't use the left hand? Sorry?
Even Dubai, maybe?
Well, Dubai is the Middle East, yes. In Muslim cultures and in India, you don't use the left hand because, frankly, there's no toilet paper in public or private toilets, and so you use the left hand to wipe yourself with hopefully with newspaper at the other end of it. So therefore, you do not touch with the left hand, and you don't eat with the left hand, and you don't shake with the left hand, of course. Okay.
Oh, no, I was going to ask you, backing up to the story where you had to meet the sheikh, did you do your homework to study the massacre guy, the guy who did massacre in Sudan, so that it gave you because at first you said you saw the dollar signs,
yes,
and you're like, that's a deal, but then you reached there and you changed your mind. Was it because you had done your homework to study?
No, this was totally out of the blue. I didn't know, because I knew about the Sudan because I've been studying world history since I was 10. So I've been aware of what goes on in other countries. So I knew that, and I was able to come up with a reason or an excuse why I couldn't do the deal with him.
Oh, when you found out that that's a Sudan person?
Yeah, he told me for the first time it was Sudan. And frankly, I knew there was something in the back of my head. There was a reason that I couldn't do it, and I couldn't remember at the time why, because the Darfur war has been over for a while, so it's not been in the news. But then I remembered
The trial was just starting.
the trial has long since finished.
Oh, okay.
But there was the trial, and he was convicted as a war criminal. And unfortunately, this guy, under international law, when this guy Omar al-Bashir travels outside of the Sudan, any country is obligated to arrest him and take him to the International Criminal Court. That's an international arrest warrant. But he's still been hosted in South Africa and in other countries, and they have not arrested him because they're thumbing the nose at the International Criminal Court. So, it's like the United Nations. Our laws are as good as people choose to enforce them or choose to do them. Okay?
Also, South Africa is not UN.
No, it is. The International Criminal Court is the UN. Yeah. But the problem with the International Criminal, well, it's not the problem. The International Criminal Court has indicted a lot of African leaders, and the Africans will say it's out of proportion. Why are you picking on us? Well, they're picking on you because you're the primary people who did the civil wars and did the massacres and did the genocides. There aren't many people, and they did Yugoslavia already. That's finished. The guy's arrested and in jail. But what's left is Africa. So yes, they are picking on the Africans, and so the Africans don't want to cooperate. Okay, thank you. So I need to move through the rest of these things very quickly. So that was a word that you did not hear me say. No, right? When I was talking to Sheikh Ali, I did not say no. So when you're dealing with shame culture people, you can say the word no. No, I don't like chocolate ice cream, or no, I don't want this. But you try to avoid saying no, if you can. And you say no in different ways. Like you make the verb negative. Can you come tomorrow? Can't come. Want something? Don't want. Okay, so you can do it that way. And you can do multiple deflections, as I sort of did with Sheikh Ali. But the other way to do multiple deflections, this is very important for the real estate business. If someone asks you a question, you give 3 ways to avoid answering. Gee, that would be extremely difficult. Or, I don't think that's going to be possible. Or, let me talk to my boss about that and I will get back to you. Okay? So, if you hear something like that, and especially if you're dealing with real estate in the United States with shame culture people, that means no. Now, if you tell an American, gee, that's impossible to do, the American, especially men, will try to fix it. Will try to come up with a way to make it work, right? The deflections mean no. So just understand that. You'll also hear expressions in Chinese, meikwanshi, which means, and shigataganai in Japanese. It cannot be helped. There's nothing we can do about it. Now, all of these ways of saying no, in psychological terms for us, they're very passive. They basically put the responsibility away from us and onto the other person, either the person or the circumstance. I can't do the deal because of sanctions in Darfur, sanctions on Sudan. Okay? But ideally, in shame cultures, you try to deflect responsibility away from yourself and onto somebody else, and so you don't personally take the blame. Okay? So this becomes very interesting. What do we mean by truth in guilt cultures? Any ideas?
Positive statement.
A positive statement, okay. Now this is not meant to be political. Truth in guilt cultures is basically anything that's fact. Something happened or it didn't. It can be proven by experience or it can be proven by observation. It can be proven somehow or at least by circumstantial evidence. Okay? This is very important because how do we do it in shame cultures? It's very different. So truth in shame cultures, they may give you an honest answer like, no, I don't want ice cream. But primarily it's what you do, what is appropriate to save your counterpart's face and to maintain group harmony and maintain the relationships. Okay, very critical difference. So Americans or Westerners will go into a shame culture to say, gee, they keep saying yes, and you know they mean no, but they keep saying yes. Well, they're saying yes because they're trying to, I want to say be nice to you, they're trying to please you, but yes does not mean yes. Yes does not mean yes until it means yes. It's a hard distinction, but they're trying to maintain the group harmony more than anything.
So in other words, if I were over there and Ray was over there and he was raised in that culture, and I said, babe, does this dress make you look fat? You might want to wear something else.
Right, exactly. Yes, very, very wise husband you've got. Yes, that's the equivalent. So let's see how it plays out in contracts. Now all of you have received contracts. You've received them, given them, written them, right? And all Western contracts, including in Europe, and including in Asia, by the way, when they get contracts from guilt culture companies, it's the same thing. Rules, expectations, and consequences for breach. If you don't ship the product on time, I can sue you, right? This is very litigious. So this is what we do. In shame cultures, contracts are guidelines. They're expectations based on relationships. Again, this is why trust and relationships become extremely important. We have them here, they're important here, but they're doubly important there. So, and in some Asian cultures and in some, between two Asian companies, there may not be a contract. 100 years ago in this country, there was something called a gentleman's agreement. You shake hands, you agree on it, you shake hands, and you know that each party is going to deliver. So this is what many Asians still have, the equivalent of a gentleman's agreement. But, you know, we don't call it that. But the point is that contracts are based on trust and relationships, and nothing is set in stone. Okay? The way you maintain relationships in shame cultures and in Europe, by the way, is by dining. Very, very critical. Remember meals in this country and what we do when we have a business meal here? You know, hello, how are you? Let's plunge into business. Don't do it. Meals in shame cultures and in Europe last 2 to 3 hours, and there may be multiple meals. And these are all to get to know you, and you do not discuss business until your host brings up the subject. Okay? You do not discuss families until your host brings up the subject. If you are a single woman traveling to a shame culture, especially to the Middle East, make up a reason why you are single, because you will be asked, where's your husband? Or are you married? Okay, so make up something.
What would you say? Like if I wasn't married?
You can say I'm a widow, I'm divorced, I haven't met the right man yet, something.
I'm working on it.
I'm working on it. Okay, so these are the other rules. Other cultures may ask about your salary. Tell them it's very impolite here. Tell them that's what they're asking, that's fine. Eat what is served, try the local cuisine, and by all means drink the tea, beer, or wine, whatever is served to you. Now, if you remember, when you're served multiple cups of something, your bladder will get very full, and then you will have to go to the, what do we call that out there? The restroom, the lavatory, right? Not the bathroom, which is up there. Okay? And if you are an alcoholic or your religion prohibits you from drinking alcohol, what I have found that works is to fake an allergy. Whatever reason, I'm allergic to beer, I'm allergic to wine, I cannot drink it. That saves face for the host. But just be careful, because if you're allergic to wine, you're allergic to grapes. Okay, and if you're allergic to beer, I don't know what's in beer, I don't know how it's made, but you may be allergic to bread or something, barley, so just be careful that you're consistent with your allergies, please. Okay?
You'd be allergic to alcohol, maybe?
Yeah, you can, yes, so I'm saying if you're allergic,
The alcohol.
you could be, yes, that's why you're faking an allergy. That's how you save face, by not drinking the alcohol.
Suppose I don't eat their food, like, it might be snails or something. Suppose I don't eat that, how do you get out of eating something that is really just gross to you?
It's preferable to taste it. They may not tell you what it is, which is safer that way. I was in a banquet in India, and all of these foods were labeled in English by the names of what they're called in Hindi. I had absolutely no idea what they were. So it's safer to try it anyway, just to be polite to the host or hostess, and if you don't want any more, just say, I'm terribly sorry, may I try something else? Or thank you, that was good, but may I try something else? Okay? So I'd like to give you a very quick lesson in dining etiquette, because this is very important. Now, I don't mean to embarrass anyone. I know your mothers taught you all very well. Your mothers and your grandmothers and your parents taught you very well. But the Europeans invented etiquette around the world where people use a knife and a fork. So when you're in an international business setting, it's beneficial to learn how to eat like a European, because Americans are not considered quite at the same level, same hierarchy. So first of all, you are not going to see something like this. I have never seen anything like that. Not even Buckingham Palace. They may have this much silverware, but the china isn't good enough for Buckingham Palace. So this is some artificial thing. However, that white is a butter dish. This is a butter plate. That's a butter knife. When you have a roll or bread, please break it up into little pieces and butter each piece individually. Do not bite the whole thing in your mouth and then butter it and bite it again. That's considered impolite. The utensils start from the outside and work in, depending on the courses you're getting. The utensils on top are for dessert, and the glasses, don't worry about them. The waiters will pour the wine or beer into the correct glass. Water, white wine, red wine, water, and so forth. Now, when you hold a knife and a fork, again, this is very European. Please do not do it this way, as many Americans would do, and then cut and change hands and so forth. So American etiquette is that you change hands when you eat. The way you do it in Europe, you take your dominant hand. If you're right-handed, it's the right hand. If you're left-handed, you take the left hand. That's where the knife goes. The fork is like this. You put your index finger on the back of the fork, tongs down, okay? And you cut with the knife like that, and then you pick up the food this way. Okay, so one motion, not double motions.
Sandwiches are eaten with a knife and fork, they're not picked up
Yes. When you finish a meal, you should put the utensils at basically a 4 o'clock position like that, next to each other. That indicates to waiters who know these things that you're finished the meal to. And when you're resting between courses or whatever, you again put the utensils on the side of the plates, like this, okay? Now again, waiters should know these things, but very often they don't. But this is still, now you know, again, what to do.
My
Yes.
sign to waiters is I put my napkin on the plate.
You can do that also.
So if you're, covering up the silverware, should you
You're not covering it up. You're putting them side by side on the plate like this.
napkin on it, and it's covered up, should I not put my napkin on it?
In proper etiquette, you don't put your napkin on.
Okay.
No. You put it on the table, not on the plate. Okay. Now I'd like to go an extra 5 minutes if you don't mind, because I think we started a bit late. And so the next slides are very important. Now, all of you are very enlightened Americans, and you're all very enlightened about cooperation and so forth. Cooperation, collaboration. So of course you would never do these things. But when you go abroad, please, no boasting or arrogance. My way is the best way, very American. So I have news for you. It usually is. And if it is, if you think that it is, please suggest it in a soft way. This is a way that we've found success in the country. Could like to try it, something like that. Everyone wants to come here. This is the great, the whole world wants to come here, all these immigrants. I have news for you, they don't want to come here. Now the immigrants who are here generally want to stay. If they've got green cards, they want to stay and they want to become citizens. But there are more refugees in the world now than we've ever had before, and the majority of them want to go back to their home countries and rebuild their lives there. They do not want to come here, and even if they're not refugees, they still don't want to come here. So this is a big myth. The biggest myth of all is the greatest country in the world, because this is our great story about ourselves, right? So again, this is true. Factually, it's not true. We are very good at certain things like entrepreneurship, like venture capital, like nonprofits, and like the military. So, and some science subjects. We excel at those. But by most educational, healthcare, scientific and otherwise, we are not toward the top of the league charts. So this is a big American myth that the politicians to perpetuate. So I'd like to end by giving you the cheapest insurance in international marketing, which is to make sure that you check your names and your slogans with a language agency. It doesn't have to be ours, but on this sheet with the languages and so forth. These are the rules of what you should look for with the language agency and people to check your names and your slogans, because these companies all got it wrong. And this is astonishing. These are multi-million dollar, billion-dollar companies, and they don't do this. I mean, how unbelievably stupid can they be? Orange is a French telecom company. Bharti Airtel is an Indian telecom company. HSBC is a bank. Used to be Hong Kong Shanghai Bank of Commerce. It's now based in Britain. I think it's moved to Hong Kong, but anyway. But these are all huge companies that should know the difference, and they didn't do it. So for example, Ford spent dollars introducing the Ford Pinto, which they have here, into Brazil, and they did not check that Pinto in Brazilian Portuguese means, shall we say, male genitals. So, good name for a car. You're all familiar with Puff's tissues, the nose tissues. So Puff introduced its product into Europe, keeping the same product name, the same brand and product name. They did not realize that Puff in British English is derogatory, as a derogatory term for homosexual, that we would say fag, not a good name for something. And Puff in German, Puff in German, basically means a whorehouse, not a good name for a product. With tissues. And finally, there's a wonderful, you've probably heard of this company, a Swedish vacuum cleaner manufacturer, very famous around the world. They made a commercial to go into Britain and Ireland in English, and the commercial was then taken to the Commonwealth, to India, to British Africa, South Africa, the Caribbean, and so forth. And it was fine, it did great. Brought it to the United States, not checking that British and American English are not exactly the same, because the slogan was, "Nothing sucks like Electrolux." So with that, I say, merci beaucoup, mille grazie, dankeschön, and spasibo, and domo arigatou gozaimashita. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.